What if the chaos of your emotions could become your greatest teacher? Hey there, welcome to Stoic Way. We're here to unpack life's toughest questions with timeless wisdom that hits home. Today, we're diving into a struggle we all face. Why does managing emotions feel like wrestling a storm? From the unshakable insights of Stoic philosophers like Epictetus to the fascinating science of our brains, this video is your guide to turning emotional turmoil into strength. Get ready, we're exploring practical tools and ancient truths that could change how you navigate your inner world. Let's jump in. Why managing emotions feels like an endless task. Have you ever felt like your emotions are a mountain you can't climb? Imagine Jane, she's the friend everyone admires for her cool-headedness. Picture her at work, calmly handling deadlines, or at home, soothing family squabbles with a steady voice. She's the rock, the one who never wavers. But then, one day, life throws her a curveball, an avalanche of stress from a looming project, a sleepless night, and a petty argument that lights the fuse. Suddenly, Jane's snapping at her co-workers over a misplaced file, raising her voice at a friend over a cancelled plan, and even slamming a door after a tense call with her mom. She freezes, stunned by her own outburst. How did this happen? She's always prided herself on keeping it together, but now she's staring at a version of herself she doesn't recognize. Sound familiar? If it does, you're in good company. For so many of us, managing emotions feels like trying to lasso a wild horse, exhausting, unpredictable, and downright relentless. But why is that? Emotions aren't just surface ripples, they're deep currents, carved into our biology over millennia, shaped by the way we were raised, and tinted by every triumph and bruise life has handed us. They're complex, layered, and stubborn, making them slippery to understand, let alone tame. Now toss in the modern world constant notifications, shifting priorities, and pressures that never let up, and it's no surprise our emotions feel like they're boiling over. Here's the kicker, though. Emotions aren't good or bad. They're not out to get us, nor are they our saviors. They're just part of the human package, raw and real. The trick isn't wiping them out, it's figuring out how to live with them, guide them, and maybe even harness them. That's where our journey begins today. A blueprint for emotional resilience. Let's step back in time to ancient Greece, where Stoicism first took root, a philosophy that feels tailor-made for wrestling with feelings. Picture Epictetus, a man born into slavery, standing tall in a noisy marketplace. He's not in some lofty temple surrounded by scrolls. He's amidst the grit of life, vendors haggling, carts rattling, voices clashing, yet he's unshaken. How? He once said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them." That's the Stoic secret. Emotions aren't the enemy. They're natural, like the wind blowing or the sun rising. Epictetus didn't lack passion, he felt the sting of hardship as much as anyone, but he refused to let those feelings steer his ship. This is Stoicism's cornerstone. We can't stop that first jolt of anger, joy, but we can decide what happens next. Think of it like sailing through a squall. The storm's not in your hands, the gusts, the waves, the dark sky, but your grip on the helm is. You adjust the sails, you chart the course. That's the power Stoics chase. Another giant, Seneca, warned us about letting emotions run rampant. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Ever lie awake, replaying a fight in your head, each loop worse than the last? That's what he's talking about. Our minds amplify the pain when feelings take the reins. So, what's the Stoic fix? Pause. Step back. Observe your emotion like it's a cloud passing overhead, no judgment, no panic. And respond, not with impulse, but with reason and poise. It's not suppression. Stoics aren't robots, it's understanding. Acknowledge the sadness, the frustration, the thrill, and then act with clarity. This takes grit, practice, and patience, like learning to play an instrument or run a mile. But the payoff? A life where tranquility isn't just a dream, it's a habit. Where wisdom, not whim, lights your path. That's the Stoic promise, and it's as alive today as it was 2,000 years ago. The neuroscience of emotional chaos. Now, let's zoom into the science because there's more to this than philosophy alone. Emotions aren't some misty, poetic thing floating around us. They're wired into our brains, etched into the hardware we've carried since our ancestors roamed the wild. Deep in the skull sits the limbic system, an ancient hub where the amygdala and hippocampus call the shots. But these are the brain's first responders, built to keep us alive. Spot a snake. The amygdala hits the alarm, fear surges. Your pulse spikes, your legs tense to bolt. Hear a baby laugh. The hippocampus eggs it with joy, flooding you with warmth. A setup as lightning fast and brutal in its efficiency it had to be. Back when survival meant outrunning predators or grabbing the last scraps of food, slow thinking was a luxury we couldn't afford. That rush when you're scared, that red-hot anger when someone cuts you off, it's your amygdala warring it, shoving reason aside to prep you for fight or flight. But here's where it gets tricky. Managing emotions isn't the limbic system's game. The job falls to the prefrontal cortex, the brain's newer, calmer architect. This is the part that plans your day, solves a puzzle, or talks you down from yelling at a rude cashier, with your voice of restraint whispering, "Hold up, let's think this over," while the amygdala screams, "Go now." Problem is, it's not built for speed. It's like pitting a sprinter against a marathon runner. The amygdala's already halfway down the track before the prefrontal cortex laces up its shoes. Bridging that gap takes effort, energy, and time, like slamming the brakes on a speeding car. That's why emotional control feels so draining. It's a literal tug of war in your head, old instincts clashing with modern mindfulness. So next time you're drowning in frustration or panic, don't beat yourself up. It's not weakness, it's biology doing its thing, a relic of our past bumping up against the demands of today. 3 pillars to tame your emotional storm. So, how do we get better at this? Let's break it down into 3 solid strategies, tools you can wield right now. Yes, up, mindfulness. This isn't some fluffy buzzword, it's about anchoring yourself in the present, fully awake to what's happening inside and out. Say your fury is your boss. Just dismissed your idea in front of everyone. Normally, you'd fire back, or stew in silence, right? Mindfulness says, stop. Breathe. Feel the heat in your chest, the clench in your jaw. Where's it coming from? Pride, stun, effort ignored. Don't shove it down or lash out, just notice it. The pause is your power. It gives you space to choose. Snap or step back. It's not easy at first, your brain's wired to react, but each try builds the muscle. Second, cognitive reframing. This is about rewriting the story you tell yourself. Stuck in traffic, late for a meeting, blood boiling. The default script is, this is a disaster, my day's ruined. Flip it. This is a breather, I'll catch up on that audiobook I've been meaning to hear. Or even, it's out of my hands. No point in raging. It's not fake positivity, it's picking a lens that cools the fire. Takes practice, sure, but it's like redirecting a river. Small shifts, big impact. Third, emotional expression. Bottling up feelings is a pressure cooker waiting to blow. Sadness, it's after a breakup. Call a friend and spill it, every messy detail. Scribble it in a journal till your hand cramps. Paint it, sing it, run it out, let it move through you. Take sadness. Instead of pretending you're fine, saying it out loud, I miss them. It hurts, frees you to heal. These aren't one-offs, they're habits. Start with mindfulness next time you're rattled. Add reframing when you're stuck. Lean into expression when the weight piles up. They're not magic wands, but tools that sharpen with use, carving a path from chaos to calm. Why bother? The rewards of emotional mastery. Okay, but is it worth the sweat? Let's paint the picture. Imagine you're a captain on a ship, your life's the vessel. Emotions the wind and waves. They'll rock you, sure, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. Leave them unchecked, and you're drifting, crashing into reefs of regret or stranded in storms of stress. But learn to steer, and everything shifts. Relationships first. Ever snapped at someone you love, then wished you could rewind? With control, you dodge that. You hear them out. You weigh your words. You mend instead of break. Think of a fight with a partner yelling escalates it. A mindful pause resolves it. That's resilience in action. Eyes grow tougher, not brittle. And decisions, unchecked emotions are like fog on a compass. Impulse says quit a job after one bad day. Reason says weigh the pros, the cons, your goals. Clarity cuts through, aligning choices with what matters. And peace, that's the gold. It's not some airy-fairy con. It's knowing you're not a slave to every pang or surge. You feel the grief, the thrill, the rage, but they don't own you. Look at Alex, a guy who ran a startup on gut and grit. Early days, he'd fire off emails in a huff, lose clients, burn bridges. Personal life. I mess arguments with his wife over nothing, distance from friends. And he stumbled into Stoicism, started practicing these steps. Idnfulson's cooled his temper. Reframing turned setbacks into lessons. Expression let him vent without wrecking shop. Result, his business leveled up, smarter calls, loyal team. Home life bloomed, patience with his kids, closeness with his spouse. And inside, a steady quiet he hadn't known. Worth it? Alex to bet his ship on it. The grind's real, but the treasure stronger bonds, sharper choices, deeper peace makes every ounce of effort sing. We're at Stoic Way. We've peeled back the layers of why emotions feel like a relentless foe, from their primal roots in our brains to the Stoic wisdom that tames them. Idnfulson's reframing and expression aren't just tactics. They're keys to unlocking a tougher, wiser you, grounded in strength and serenity. So, what's your story? How do you face your emotional storms? Drop a comment, share your thoughts. We'd love to hear. Hit that subscribe button for more dives into Stoic gold, and stick around for our next video. Up ahead, join us for a gripping discussion with guests Benjamin and Charlotte, tearing into Stoic philosophy's deepest gems in our podcast. Don't miss it.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling something I think we all struggle with sometimes. You know those times when our emotions just feel like they're all over the place?
Yeah.
And we just feel kind of chaotic inside? We're going to take a deep dive into that. We're going to try to explore why it feels that way, and also unpack some strategies to maybe gain a bit more control. And to help us with that, we're looking at Stoic Guide, Mastering Emotional Chaos with Ancient Wisdom.
Well, you know, it's interesting how this ancient philosophy is becoming so popular again.
Yeah.
And there's a good reason for that. It really speaks to that experience we all have of trying to deal with those really big feelings.
It does. And the source even starts off with a story about this woman named Jane. And she seems like she has it all together. She's calm and collected, and nothing really seems to faze her. But then one day, it's like everything just goes off the rails. She has this stressful deadline, and it just sends her into a spiral, and she's snapping at people at work, and even like the smallest things are setting her off. It's a good example of how even if you look emotionally stable on the outside,
Right.
you can still kind of get swept away by those feelings.
Yeah, it's a great illustration of how you can't always judge a book by its cover when it comes to emotions. And what I find really interesting is that Stoicism gives us this way of understanding why we have those moments where it feels like our emotions come out of nowhere.
Oh, so it's not just about willpower then, or like trying harder to keep it together.
No, it's much deeper than that. The Stoics were really ahead of their time because they realized that you can't always control that initial wave of emotion that hits you, but they also believe that we have a lot more power than we think to choose how we respond to those feelings.
That's an important distinction. So it's more like instead of suppressing your emotions, you learn how to kind of ride those waves a little bit better.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. It's kind of like surfing. You can't control the ocean, but you can learn to navigate those waves and maybe even find a sense of joy or mastery in the middle of all that turbulence.
I love that analogy. It's so much more empowering than just trying to like white knuckle your way through every emotional storm.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? What does this Stoic approach look like when you try to put it into practice?
Well, one of the core principles of Stoicism is this idea that men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. That's a quote from Epictetus. And it's basically the foundation for this idea of cognitive reframing, which is still a powerful tool we use today in psychology.
So it's not the traffic jam that's making us angry. It's our thoughts about being stuck in the traffic.
Exactly. It's how we interpret the situation that really fuels those intense emotions. And the Stoics believe that we can choose a different way of looking at it, a different interpretation that doesn't send us into anger or frustration or despair.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also feels a little challenging. Like, how do you change those deeply ingrained thought patterns, especially when you're in the heat of the moment and your emotions are running really high?
It definitely takes practice, and it won't happen overnight. The Stoics had a framework, though, for cultivating that kind of mental flexibility.
Okay.
And one of the key pillars of that framework is mindfulness.
Mindfulness. It feels like everyone's talking about mindfulness these days. But what does it mean within Stoicism?
It doesn't mean you have to empty your mind or go sit on a mountaintop.
Right.
It's more about being aware of what's happening right now in this moment, especially being aware of what's happening inside of you. It's about noticing those emotional waves as they come up, but without judging them or immediately getting swept away by them.
So you're not reacting on autopilot. You're pausing to observe what's going on inside.
Precisely, that pause, even if it's just for a few seconds, creates a space where you can make a choice.
Yeah.
And in that space, that's where we can use those Stoic principles of reframing and wise action.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So mindfulness gives us that awareness, and then reframing helps us kind of shift how we're looking at things. Is there anything else that we can do to kind of help us navigate those choppy emotional waters?
Yeah, there is. The Stoics also really emphasize that we need to find healthy ways to express our emotions. They realize that if you bottle things up, it just creates more pressure and it can actually backfire on you, which leads to those Jane moments that we were talking about earlier.
So it's not about suppressing your feelings, but finding a constructive way to move through them.
Exactly. And that can look different for different people. Journaling, talking to a trusted friend, expressing yourself creatively, physical activity. The key is to find what works for you and let yourself feel those emotions fully without letting them control you.
It sounds like we need like a whole toolbox full of strategies. So we've got mindfulness for awareness, reframing for changing how we look at things, and then healthy expression for actually processing those feelings. And the source actually breaks it down into those 3 pillars of emotional mastery.
It does, and what's cool is that they all work together really well. Mindfulness creates the space where you can make a choice. Then reframing helps you choose a more empowering way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And then healthy expression allows you to kind of release any pent-up energy or tension that's built up.
Okay. I'm definitely starting to see the value in all of this, but I have to admit, it also sounds like a lot of work. Like, why bother putting in all this effort? What's the payoff for mastering our emotions?
That's a great question, and it's one that I think a lot of people ask themselves. It's easy to think of emotional mastery as this kind of lofty ideal, but the Stoics were really practical. They believed that virtue, including emotional virtue, led to a more fulfilling and flourishing life.
So it's not just about feeling better in the moment. It's about living a better life overall. I like that. What are some of those tangible benefits we can expect to see?
Well, one of the most obvious benefits is stronger relationships. When you're able to regulate your own emotions, you're less likely to project your negativity onto other people. You can respond with more patience, understanding, and compassion, which makes for a much more harmonious and loving dynamic.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine it would probably have a positive impact on our decision-making, too.
Absolutely. When we're ruled by our emotions, we tend to make impulsive choices that we regret later.
Yeah.
But when we can step back and assess the situation with a clear and calm mind, we can make decisions that align with our values and long-term goals.
So it's less about those knee-jerk reactions and more about responding intentionally and thoughtfully. I like that.
And of course, there's the benefit of greater inner peace and resilience. When we're not constantly at the mercy of our emotions, we develop a sense of calm and stability that helps us handle life's challenges with more grace and equanimity.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But I imagine it takes a lot of practice and dedication to get to that point.
It does. It's a lifelong journey. It's not like you reach a destination. But the beauty is that every small step we take toward greater emotional mastery has a ripple effect on our lives.
I'm curious, what are some of those small steps we can take? Does the source offer any practical tips for actually putting these principles into action?
It does, and they're really simple and accessible. For example, with mindfulness, they suggest starting with just a few minutes of dedicated practice every day.
Okay, like what? Should I be sitting in lotus pose chanting?
Necessarily. It could be as simple as paying attention to your breath for a few minutes, noticing the sensations in your body, or just observing your thoughts without judgment.
So it's about bringing that present moment awareness into everyday life.
Exactly. It's about pausing throughout the day to check in with yourself. What am I feeling right now? What sensations are in my body? What thoughts are going through my mind?
And you're not judging those thoughts or feelings, right?
Right. It's about observing them with curiosity and acceptance, just as they are.
Okay, I can see how that could be really helpful. What about cognitive reframing? Any tips for starting to shift those automatic negative thoughts?
One of the most effective techniques is to keep a journal and write down those thoughts as they come up.
So if I find myself thinking, I'm a total failure, I should write that down. It seems a little counterintuitive.
It might feel strange at first, but writing it down creates some distance between you and the thought. It helps you see it more objectively and to start questioning whether it's really true.
Okay, I see how that could be helpful. So instead of just believing every thought that pops into my head, I can start to examine it a little more critically.
Exactly. And once you've identified the thought, you can look for evidence that proves it wrong. For example, if you're thinking, I'm a failure, ask yourself, what are some of the things I've accomplished? What are my strengths? What evidence do I have that this thought isn't actually true?
That's a really helpful way to start challenging those negative thought patterns.
Yeah.
So we've got mindfulness for awareness, reframing for shifting our perspective, and what about healthy outlets for expressing our emotions? What are some practical tips for that?
The most important thing is to find what feels authentic and healthy for you. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. You're not trying to force yourself to do something that feels uncomfortable or inauthentic.
Exactly. For some people, it might be writing in a journal. For others, it might be dancing or painting or spending time in nature. And for others, it might be talking to a therapist or a trusted friend.
So the key is to find what helps you process those emotions in a way that feels safe in releasing.
You got it. And don't be afraid to experiment. Try different things and see what works for you. What works for one person might not work for another.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm building a toolkit here. And I'm realizing that this whole journey of emotional mastery isn't about becoming some kind of emotionless robot.
That's such an important point. It's not about suppressing or denying our emotions. It's about developing a deeper understanding of ourselves and becoming more skillful in how we navigate the full spectrum of human emotions.
And that takes practice, right?
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey, not a destination.
Okay, so as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. The source got me thinking about this. If you could choose one emotion to master more fully, which one would it be and why? What comes to mind for you?
That's a great question to sit with. We'll dive back into this and explore the source material even further in part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into mastering emotional chaos. I've been thinking about that question, which emotion to master? And it really got me thinking about how each emotion is kind of unique. It's got its own flavor, its own purpose.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things.
What's interesting is how often we label emotions as good or bad, positive or negative. But the Stoics had a different view. They saw all emotions as part of being human, and each one serves a purpose, even the ones that feel uncomfortable.
So even like anger or sadness, those emotions we usually try to avoid, they actually have a role to play. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, let's take anger, for example. People often think it's a bad thing, but it can be a powerful motivator for change. When we see injustice or something that goes against our values, that anger can push us to speak up or take action or fight for what's right.
So it's not about suppressing anger completely, but more about using it in a constructive way instead of letting it destroy things.
Exactly. It's recognizing that anger itself isn't the problem. It's how we choose to respond to it that makes the difference. And that's where those Stoic principles we've been talking about, mindfulness, reframing healthy expression, they become so important.
This is making me think about all those times when I felt frustrated or even resentful when things didn't go my way.
Yeah.
Those emotions definitely didn't feel good at the time, but maybe they were trying to tell me something. Maybe they were like a signal to rethink my goals or set better boundaries or try a different approach.
That's a really insightful way to look at it. Emotions can be like messengers, giving us valuable information about our needs and our values and our boundaries. And when we learn to listen to those messages with curiosity and compassion instead of judgment or fear, we can understand ourselves better and what really matters to us.
This reminds me of that quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Mm,
It seems like Stoicism is all about expanding that space
right.
between stimulus and response to give us more room to choose wisely.
That's a beautiful connection. It really highlights how this isn't just about feeling better in the moment, although that is a nice benefit. It's about developing a deeper sense of self-awareness and wisdom and agency in our lives. It's about becoming the authors of our own emotional narratives instead of feeling like we're just characters being tossed around by fate.
So how do we start to take back that control? Where do we begin?
Well, the source emphasizes that it's not about changing everything overnight. It's about making small, consistent changes in our daily lives that can have a big impact over time.
Okay, I like that. Small steps, big impact.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of those small but powerful practices?
Absolutely. When it comes to mindfulness, one of the simplest and most effective things you can do is start each day with a few minutes of focusing on your breath. Just notice your chest rising and falling, the air flowing in and out of your nose. You don't have to change anything. Just observe it with a sense of curiosity and acceptance.
That sounds manageable. Just like a mini meditation to kick off the day. Any other tips for squeezing more mindfulness into our busy lives?
Another great practice is to bring those mindful moments into your everyday activities. So instead of rushing through your morning routine without thinking, try to really enjoy each sensation. The warm water on your skin in the shower, the taste of your coffee, the feeling of the sun on your face as you step outside.
It's about being present, even when you're doing ordinary things.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how much more you appreciate life when you slow down and pay attention to those little things. And when those emotional waves come up during the day, mindfulness gives you that ability to pause to see them without judgment and to choose a better way to respond.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What about cognitive reframing? Any practical tips for challenging those negative thoughts?
One technique I find helpful is to keep what I call a thought journal. Whenever you have a thought that's causing you distress, write it down in your journal, whether it's anxiety, anger, self-criticism, whatever it is. Then ask yourself some critical questions about that thought.
I imagine that's kind of like being a detective. You're gathering evidence and questioning everything. I'm ready to put on my Sherlock Holmes hat.
Exactly. You want to figure out if the thought is actually true or if it's just a bad habit that's not helping you. Ask yourself, what evidence supports this thought? What evidence goes against it? Is there another way to look at this situation?
I love that. It's like we're reclaiming control over our own minds instead of letting those negative thoughts run wild.
And remember, it's not about forcing yourself to think positive all the time. That's not realistic or even helpful. It's more about recognizing that our thoughts are not facts. They're just interpretations.
Yeah.
And we have the power to choose more empowering and helpful interpretations.
So we've covered mindfulness and cognitive reframing. What about healthy ways to express our emotions? Any suggestions for that?
The key here is to find what feels authentic and supportive for you. There's no right or wrong answer.
Right. It's not about forcing ourselves into something that doesn't feel right.
Exactly. Some people find it helpful to journal to get their thoughts and feelings out on paper. Others connect with their emotions through creative expression like painting, dancing, music, writing poetry. And for some, physical activity like running yoga or even a walk in nature can help to release pent-up energy and tension.
I've definitely noticed that when I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed, a walk in the park can really change how I'm feeling. It's like those negative thoughts just disappear and I can reconnect with a sense of peace and clarity.
Nature is amazing at calming our nervous system and reminding us that there's a bigger picture. And speaking of connection, don't underestimate the power of talking to a trusted friend or therapist. Sharing our burdens with someone who listens with empathy and compassion can be incredibly healing.
You know, as we're talking about all these different practices, it's making me realize that they're not just about managing emotions in the moment. They're about being kinder to ourselves.
That's a really important point. This isn't about beating ourselves up for having difficult emotions. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would give to a good friend. It's about remembering that we're all works in progress and we're all doing the best we can with what we have right now.
I love that. It takes a lot of pressure off. And it reminds us that this is a process, not a destination. There will be times when we slip up or fall back into old habits.
Of course. And when that happens, instead of judging ourselves, we can just acknowledge it, learn from it, and gently guide ourselves back to those practices that help us feel better.
You know, the source talks about how our emotions are all connected. They're not separate things inside us, but more like a web.
That's right. So if we can learn to master one emotion, it can have a positive impact on the others. For example, if we practice patience, it might be easier to control our anger when things get tough. Or if we practice gratitude, we might find that we experience less envy or resentment.
It's amazing to think about how these emotions can influence each other, how working on one area can make us stronger emotionally overall. It's like we're creating this tapestry of emotional intelligence.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this tapestry is always changing, with each experience, each challenge, each time we practice, adding new threads and textures.
It's really inspiring to think about how much power we have when it comes to shaping our emotional landscape.
Right.
And the more we use these Stoic principles, the better we become at navigating all those human emotions with grace and wisdom.
It really is a lifelong journey of self-discovery and growth. And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear what you've been thinking about. What's one small step you could take today to start building greater emotional mastery in your life?
That's a great question to think about. It could be something as simple as 5 minutes of mindfulness practice, journaling about a tough emotion, or telling someone you care about how much you appreciate them. What about you? What comes to mind?
Well, for me, I think it would be to really try to be more patient throughout the day. I often find myself getting frustrated with traffic, long lines, technology issues. So today I'm going to make an effort to approach those moments with more acceptance and understanding, reminding myself that I can't control everything, but I can control how I react.
That's a great goal.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the heart of Stoicism, accepting what we can't change and focusing our energy on what we can.
Exactly. And remember, even the smallest actions can make a difference, not just in our own lives, but in the world around us.
We'll be back for part 3 of this deep dive into mastering emotional chaos, exploring even more insights from the source material. Welcome back to our deep dive into mastering emotional chaos. It's amazing how throughout this exploration of Stoicism, I've been thinking about how much it emphasizes our own power, our own agency. We often talk about our emotions as if they're these outside forces that just overwhelm us and we're powerless against them.
Yeah, it's true. We say things like getting swept away or losing control,
Right.
which makes it sound like we're just helpless little boats in a storm.
Exactly.
But the Stoics and even modern psychology show us that we actually have way more influence over those inner feelings than we realize.
And it's not about pretending those stormy feelings aren't there, right?
Right.
It's more about figuring out how to handle them, like you said before, like a surfer riding a wave.
Exactly. It's about understanding that emotions themselves aren't good or bad. They're just signals, pieces of information. And it's what we do with that information that decides whether we sink or swim.
That makes me think about the Stoic practice of negative visualization, which I thought was really fascinating
Yeah.
in the source material. Isn't it a bit counterintuitive, though, to purposely think about bad things happening?
It might seem that way at first, but the Stoics weren't saying we should be pessimistic.
Okay.
Negative visualization is more like a tool to help us appreciate what we have and to get ready for those tough times that life throws at us.
So it's less about obsessing over the worst-case scenario and more about mentally preparing ourselves so we're not totally blindsided if something difficult does happen.
Exactly. By thinking about potential setbacks, we can come up with plans for how to deal with them, and that can actually lessen our anxiety in the long run. Plus, it helps us appreciate the good things in our lives that we might normally take for granted.
So it's like strengthening our emotional immune system, so to speak. We've talked about the individual benefits of managing our emotions. Stronger relationships, better decisions, more inner peace. But the source also suggests that all this inner work we do can actually have a ripple effect that goes beyond just ourselves. I'd love to hear more about that.
This brings up a really important point about how individual growth can contribute to a better world. The Stoics had this belief that virtue was contagious. So when we work on things like wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control, those qualities naturally spread out and influence the people around us.
So it's not just about self-improvement then, it's about becoming a positive force in the
Yeah.
world.
That's a powerful way to think about it. Think about this. When we're in control of our emotions, we're less likely to react impulsively or take things out on other people.
Right.
We're better able to show empathy, understanding, and compassion, which are so important for creating a more just fair and peaceful society.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like we're all connected in some way, and even our smallest choices and actions contribute to the overall energy of the world.
It's a really beautiful and profound idea. And it gives this whole journey of emotional mastery an even bigger purpose. It's not just about us individually, it's about how we contribute to something much larger than ourselves.
As we're talking about this, I'm remembering that question we've been asking throughout this deep dive. Which emotion would you choose to master more fully? I've been thinking about it. And for me, I think it would have to be fear.
That's a really human emotion to struggle with,
Yeah.
and one that the Stoics had a lot to say about. They saw fear as often coming from misunderstanding what we can truly control.
Right. They emphasize the importance of focusing on our own actions and what we want to do rather than on things outside of ourselves that we can't fully control. I can see how changing your perspective that way could be really freeing when it comes to facing your fears.
It can be life-changing. When we realize we don't have to be controlled by fear, it opens us up to new possibilities, new experiences, and new levels of growth. What about you? Which emotion comes to mind for you?
Well, I've always struggled with being impatient. I tend to get frustrated when things don't happen fast enough or when plans change unexpectedly.
That's something a lot of us can relate to in today's world where everything moves so quickly and we're always focused on results. The Stoics had some really wise advice for developing patience, though. They didn't see it as passively putting up with tough situations, but more about approaching them with wisdom and understanding.
So it's not about getting stuck in that feeling of urgency, but more about pausing, acknowledging what's actually happening, and choosing to respond with a calm and clear mind.
Perfectly said. And I think that sums up the essence of Stoicism, realizing that true freedom isn't about controlling what happens around us, but mastering how we react on the inside. It's about aligning our thoughts, emotions, and actions with virtue, wisdom, and a deep understanding of our place in the world.
That's a really powerful message, and it feels incredibly relevant to what we're facing in the world right now.
It does, doesn't it? In a world that often feels so chaotic and uncertain, Stoicism gives us this timeless framework for dealing with life's ups and downs with grace, resilience, and a deep sense of inner peace.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've gained so many new tools for understanding and managing my emotions, and I love how Stoicism focuses not just on individual well-being, but also on our interconnectedness and how we can make the world a better place.
I agree. It's been such an enriching conversation, and I hope everyone listening feels empowered to try out some of these Stoic principles in their own lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into mastering emotional chaos, we want to leave you with this. Think about what really resonated with you. What's one small step you can take today to cultivate greater emotional mastery in your life?
And remember, even the smallest actions can create ripples leading to more peace, wisdom, and fulfillment.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of self-discovery. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.